Ukraine's president says his troops are battling in the northeast, where Russian forces are capturing villages and attacking energy facilities. How significant is this latest Russian offensive in Kharkiv? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. The Ukrainian military has replaced the commander responsible for Kharkiv in the northeast. On Monday, it conceded Russian troops were making gains along the border. Their advance deeper into the region has prompted fears among Western allies of a major assault on Kharkiv. Well, the city is Ukraine's second largest, located just 30 kilometers south of the Russian border. When Russia invaded in 2022, its soldiers crossed into the Kharkiv region. Months later, the Ukrainian counteroffensive forced Russian troops to retreat. But shelling and bombardment has continued. Now, the Russians are back and say they've taken 9 villages in a matter of days. Is the Ukrainian army on the back foot while trying to defend a 1,000-kilometer front line? Could the delay in US military aid prove to be a turning point in the war? We'll discuss these questions and more with our guests in just a moment. But first, this report from Imogen Kimber.
The Russian army is advancing in northeastern Ukraine at its fastest pace in more than 2 years. Since Friday, it says troops have taken 9 villages in the Kharkiv region on the border. According to the governor, more than 4,000 people are being moved to safety.
Fighting is taking place 500 metres from my house. The Vovchansk River is 500 metres away from my house and the Russians are on the other side. Ukrainian tanks roll in, shoot and roll out. There is shouting all the time, military orders, and you can hear people being captured. Shells are flying constantly, day and night.
Whether this man's village, Vovchansk, is under Ukrainian or Russian control is disputed. The Ukrainian army says it's fighting back, and Russia is suffering heavy losses, with around 100 of its soldiers killed. But the president concedes the situation is difficult.
We need to inflict as many losses on the occupying forces as possible. The conditions on the outskirts of the city of Vovchansk are extremely challenging. The city is under constant Russian fire and our military is launching counterattacks.
He added conditions are similarly dire in Donetsk and says Russia's strategy could be to stretch Ukrainian troops thin on the ground. Across the border in Russia, Ukrainian shelling on Belgorod killed several people at the weekend.
We provided first aid and evacuated all the people from the building. The people were having breakdowns. There was panic, hysteria.
While in Moscow, President Vladimir Putin is reshuffling his cabinet. Longtime ally Sergei Shoigu, who as defence minister has overseen the so-called special military operation in Ukraine, will now head the National Security Council. He's expected to be replaced by Andrei Belousov, a former deputy prime minister and economist, suggesting the president is looking to focus on the defence ministry's finances. But Ukraine's biggest concern is the latest supply of US weapons. Without it, soldiers will be outmanned and outgunned, and vulnerable to further Russian advances. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring our guests into the show now. We have joining us from Odessa, Ukraine, Hanna Shelest, the Security Studies Program Director at Ukrainian Prism, a foreign policy and security think tank. In Vienna, Roger Hilton is a Defence and Security Fellow at GLOBSEC, a global think tank focusing on security and sustainability. And in Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer is an independent Russian defence and military analyst. Good to have you all with us. Let me start with Hanna. We know the situation is serious right now in Kharkiv. How serious is it? Is Kharkiv on the verge of falling?
If we speak about the city of Kharkiv, we are very far and not closer than we've been before about the falling. You need to understand that that is a city of more than 1 million, not the same as the small villages or towns that have been under the fire before. However, definitely that is the new front line. Some parts of it being active even the last 6 months, but that is the new developments because the new Russian forces came with the wide attack. I will probably characterize it as so. So in this case, it is just taking off a lot of the defense forces of the Ukrainian armed forces from the eastern front to the northern front. So in this case, we just have the new hotspot and the longer front line that we had even before.
Pavel, do you agree with that? How is Russia pretty far from capturing the entire region, let alone Kharkiv city of 1 million people, as Hanna pointed out?
Well, the Russian forces crossed the border. They have been in this part of Kharkiv Oblast in 22. Then they retreated. Then the front line, it was not really a front line, it was the border. So there was not much troops, at least on the Ukrainian side. And so the Russians moved in again, are probing the Ukrainian defenses. Right now there's a kind of mobile skirmishes happening there, several kilometers from the Ukrainian border. No, this is not very close to Kharkiv city. So this is a kind of recon through battle situation. Maybe Russia will throw in more forces and try to push seriously. But right now it's a kind of active recon operation on the border. Maybe the city of Vovchansk, Russia says it's already there. The Ukrainians dispute that the city has fallen. It's a small town on the border. Right now it's not yet developing into a major battle, but it has that potential.
Roger, one thing I think everybody agrees in is that the tide has changed. What has Russia done in order to change the situation around in places like Kharkiv?
Well, I take a bit of an issue in the sense that you're insinuating that Russia has taken the drive on this. I mean, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is so much more than just the battlefield in the east. And while in the last couple of days, Russia has been able to occupy 9 or 10 villages, and it's nowhere near has the manpower to theoretically take Kharkiv, there has been so much else going on about successes of Ukraine, where I think the media is focusing too much on this one spot right here. Just last Thursday, Ukraine
Roger, is it not driven by the statements then of Ukrainian officials themselves who have said the situation is very difficult in Kharkiv? They seem to indicate that, they are on the back foot there.
Absolutely. Listen, I'm totally acknowledging that it's a tough slog at the moment up north and that they've had to repossess forces. But if this is the best that Russia has been able to put together over the last 6 months when Ukraine is at its lowest, it's actually quite an uninspiring position right now. That's not to say the heavy losses that Ukraine is taking, but given the strength of advantage that Russia had, I would have expected them to do much better than where they are right now.
Okay. Let me bring in Pavel for your perspective on that. Are the advances and gains by Russia actually overblown?
Well, Russia is pushing forward in many places, not only in Kharkiv, of course, in the Donbass, with moderate success, but still with success. There's hope that in Moscow that these pushes could eventually lead to a snap in morale of Ukrainian military and Ukrainian society, and the Ukrainian front line will begin to collapse, or that even the threat of such a disastrous for Ukraine and the West scenario will push the Ukrainians and their Western allies to seek some kind of quid pro quo with Russia to stop the slow but steady Russian advance and get some kind of ceasefire of sorts on the battlefield based more or less on the present line of control.
I do want to pick up later on what this means for the prospect of diplomacy and talks. But before we go down that road, let's take it back to Hanna. And Hanna, what impact is the Russian advance in Kharkiv actually having at this moment? Are Ukrainian forces being overstretched over an increasingly long front line?
We probably need to make one step behind and to understand the moment why these counteroffensives are happening right now. Because for Russia, it is the very narrow timing when they can advance before Ukraine received all those weapons that had been delayed by the US. And finally, the Congress adopted a decision. So the artillery, first of all, the artillery ammunition that Ukraine been missing for the last 6 months has started to arrive to Ukraine. Plus, we're expecting in approximately a month F-16, and plus in June, the Czech initiative with ammunition also would start delivery. So Russia understands that May is that month when they are still in surplus of ammunition compared to Ukraine. So they need to make a big push with all their forces before Ukraine received a serious backup. And in this case,
so Hanna, are we getting close to a turning point? Is that what you're saying? Is this one way or another a turning point? Either Russia makes some big gains or the Ukrainians will when they get American supplies?
Definitely Russia will not be able to take the big bang, at least with what we see now, with those forces are coming and with those losses they have on the ground. So it seems even from the tactics that they chose in the Kharkiv region that the big occupation of the new territories is not what they are really searching for. The stretching of Ukrainian forces and to make for Ukrainian forces more difficult to start a counteroffensive as soon as they receive the ammunition, yes, that can be one of their primary goals, but also demonstration that they can go further, the Bakhmut, the town that they've been trying to reoccupy for 9 months and de facto just destroyed the town, so you cannot name it as a normal occupation. Plus, they also need to the presidential elections, to the new team or old new team that are coming now, the demonstration of the certain successes. Because the previous months, there were a lot of failures in Crimea, and we know that Crimea is very symbolic for Russia. So they needed to show, okay, you are targeting us in Crimea, we will do it where you feel more vulnerable. And that appears to be the Kharkiv region.
Roger, is there some concern, however you frame this one as whether it's overblown by the media or not, is the concern over the psychological impact of seeing images once again of what appears to be Russian troops retaking parts of the Kharkiv region, people having to flee, being bussed out of their homes and put up in other places?
In no way am I trying to diminish the impact of the villagers who have had to leave and sort of reliving all of this. But we're over 800 days into this war now, everybody. And to think that just because there's been this temporary seizure of these villages and the rescue forces have had to come and rescue people and take them away, to think that that's going to have this game-changing effect on the morale of the troops, I just don't buy it. And in opposition, the massive morale boost that will be coming to Ukraine in the forms of both the largest British aid package and the American aid package will surely sort of carry them over this very tough moment. So I'm not buying that, just because of these very tough images and of course the loss of Ukrainian life, I don't think it's going to sort of be such a huge detriment to the performance and holding the line.
Pavel, what is the Russian aim then? I'm sure you've heard the comments of our other guests as well as others who've said Russia hasn't amassed enough troops to take Kharkiv in its entirety. Does Russia, in your reading, want to take Kharkiv as a whole or simply to spread out those Ukrainian lines?
Well, it's a normal military practice to probe the enemy line, to find weak places, seek opportunities, and then exploit these opportunities. Up to now, the offensive in the Kharkiv region is not major by the number of troops actually involved. There are Russian reserves behind the lines that could reinforce. Maybe they will do so, maybe not. Maybe they'll be. Russia will try advancing in other places too, seeking out weak spots in Ukrainian defenses and in Ukrainian morale. Because the main Russian message is that Russia is unbeatable, that the Ukrainian resistance is futile, that they may fight, but they cannot basically stop Russia because it's bigger, it has more men, more equipment, and more shells, and it would be better for the Ukraine and for the West to find some kind of a diplomatic solution that would, if not legalize, or at least codify the present situation and make it into some kind of maybe ceasefire for some time.
Pavel, just listening to you there then, I'm wondering, do you think the Russian military thinking buys into the argument that Russia sees a window of opportunity that is closing before major Western supplies kick in?
Well, there were such in Russian kind of bloggers are writing about that Russia has a window of opportunity, though it's not. They're not talking about several months, but maybe a couple of years, when the West efforts to increase defense production really begin to pay off, maybe in a year and a half. And when in Europe and in North America, they'll begin massively producing ordnance and conventional weapons. Right. And Russia will be in a serious situation because matching that is not an easy task at all, since Russian GDP is 100 times less than the sum of the GDPs of all the Ramstein Ukrainian allies. So that's, yes, that Russia should find a way to end this conflict in the coming year and a half, because if it drags on, Russia, as a war of attrition, Russia will be at a very serious disadvantage.
Hanna, how much concern is there that these kinds of operations and advances by Russian forces could threaten Ukrainian supply lines in places like Jazeera?
Jazeera is another small town, and the question is that Ukraine, since the day one of this war, tried to diversify its logistics, because we perfectly understood that the long legs of logistics or the concentration just on one or two directions will definitely become the ultimate goal of the Russian attacks. That's just the classics. That's why you see that there are a lot of the different small legs and very quick delivery of the supply. That's why the last months there've been so many attacks against the railway system, because the railway is definitely quite well developed, and several big railway knots and the stations being attacked by the Russian missiles. And that is happening not only around the Jazeera, because there it's already easier to deliver in terms of necessity with the other means of transportation, but you also see these attacks in the Western Ukraine. They are coming predominantly either against the energy system or against the railway system. And the same for Odessa. A lot is going to the port, because that is the ideas that the supplies are happening also are through the ports, or at least from Romania to Ukraine by land. So all of these, all attacks against logistics, they've been quite unexpected. And that's why you have as many as possible the roads and chains of transportation and logistics to the east.
I wonder if we take the question now to Roger of how will the West react to what's going on? We've heard statements from some of the Western leaders, like that of the United Kingdom, the Foreign Secretary, talking about how serious the situation and critical a moment it is. Will that translate, do you think, into a change of policy?
Every conflict, regardless of what it is, has moments of up and down. And right now, the Ukrainians are down. But every message that is being sent out now says we're going to stick with Ukraine while it's at a low point and things will get better. You know, just like the aid packages that passed, for instance, there is now a growing trend, in Europe that is going from the seizure of Russian frozen assets, which is super important with the repo act that was passed. So I don't see any reason to think that just because there's this moment happening in Kharkiv, that policymakers will finally say we need to force a peace on Ukraine. And most importantly, you have very loud members of the European Union, the Baltics, Poland, the new Czech president, Peter Pavel, former chairman of the NATO Military Committee. This is not going to be a one-off decision made by one or two states. France, Emmanuel Macron has been very forthcoming now about, the need for Ukraine to win on this. So again, I am not of the position that just because Ukraine is in the dark right now, that policymakers will abandon them anytime soon.
All right, Pavel, we've had a change of guard, so to speak, in the Russian Defense Ministry. What does that tell us, do you think, or what can we read into that when it comes to Russian military thinking going forward?
What the Kremlin says and what they've done is kind of revolutionary for Russia. This never happened before. For a civilian economist and economic advisor and minister to become a defense minister. What happened in the United States, there was Robert McNamara, who transformed the Pentagon at the time of Soviet war in Vietnam, but not in Russia. And this was made, and that's what the Kremlin also confirms, because this is a war of attrition and it's dependent on their economy. Russia is mobilizing its economic defense potential. The West is doing the same, but of course, Russia is already up to 7% of GDP defense spending. The West is spending, of course, in percentage terms, much less. But the West has much more GDP, 100 times more. So the economy, this new defense minister, Andrei Belosov, is going to be, apparently his main task is to mobilize further the Russian defense industry, make the defense ministry work better with industry. He's also an economist. That means he speaks the same language as the liberal part of the economic part of the Putin's government, so he can mobilize them too to put all the effort to match the Western mobilization of resources with Russian mobilization and demonstrate to the West that Russia cannot be defeated and that the only way forward is a diplomatic solution.
That's quite a challenge he's got ahead of him. I'm wondering, so there's perhaps a shift in thinking somewhat going on the Russian side. Hanna, is there a shift in Ukrainian tactics going on? In the last few months, we've seen increasing attacks on targets inside Russia. And yesterday, of course, we've seen attacks on what the Russians have reported as civilian buildings, like that of Belgorod, where a number of civilians, Russia said, were killed.
I would start from the very end, because even the Russian media doubted significantly, because there were no attack against the Belgorod like this, and that building was definitely not the Ukrainian armed forces attack. However, definitely you're right that the last months Ukrainian armed forces, or better to say the security services, intensified attacks in Russia, but all of them are happening, if not against the military objects that can be either enterprises producing drones, for example, or some equipment for the military, but predominantly the plants for oil refineries. Why? The reason is very simple. We are not targeting the oil itself, but only the oil refineries. That's from where Russia gets quite a significant income for their state budget, and state budget means military budget. Considering that the economic sanctions, first of all, the energy sanctions, appeared not so successful because India and China were eager to buy the discounted Russian energy sources, so that became the method how to limit the Russian income. And the second is definitely because the armed forces needs any type of the petrol. The modern army cannot be without it. So the problems with the refined petrol of the military type, it means that the armed forces will also have the problems with supply. So in this case, we really saw the results, not with the prices of the oil at the world market, as some economists were afraid, but with the possibilities of Russia to export the energy resources, or better say refined energy resources at the world market.
Roger, at the end of the day, when you read the situation, however much more Western aid comes in, however much more targeting there is of the Russian energy facilities, is Ukraine handicapped by a lack of manpower?
Well, I mean, it is a very complicated question. And I think Hanna will agree that, in about a month's time or maybe 6 weeks, this new conscription law will come into effect, and they will be able to sort of generate more manpower. And some of the European nations are working with Ukraine to sort of bring back Ukrainian soldiers for the fighting. Of course, the manpower is one side about it, but the issue is that, by doing this and sort of by pushing Ukraine to make a peace with Ukraine, it sets an unbelievably dangerous precedent, not just in Europe, but for China and for other great power politics that is really dominating the landscape right now. So, of course, for the foreseeable future, Ukraine will have to be above and beyond in terms of its performance if it is handicapped in the amount of troops. But I still think the will to fight is there. The new aid package will be coming on. And in any circumstance, it will be Ukraine who will decide when they want to make peace with Russia, not by anybody else.
All right, let me bring in Pavel. I think we've got a couple of minutes left. Pavel, is part of the Russian advances that we're seeing to try and counter the increasing attacks that we're seeing on Russian territory, do the advances in places like Kharkiv and elsewhere mean, in the Russian thinking, the possibility of less attacks on Russian territory? I know Hanna pointed out that she doesn't believe, and the Ukrainians haven't officially taken responsibility for what happened at that civilian building in Belgorod, but Russian officials have spoken about it or framed it as a Ukrainian attack, rather.
Well, yes, the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, has said that we should establish a buffer zone on the Ukrainian side of the border so that Ukraine could not hit targets inside Russia. It's maybe the push into Kharkiv over the border is to establish some kind of such buffer zone. But it's not, easy to decide where that border ends, where that zone ends, and what's Russian and what's not Russia. And of course, Ukraine has been demonstrated its capability to hit targets.
Well, there is an internationally recognized border, of course, Pavel, right? But I guess maybe the challenge is more technical. In an era of drones and rockets, what is a buffer zone anymore?
Ukraine has demonstrated our capabilities to attack way beyond the Volga and in the North Caucasus. So that means where should that buffer zone end? On the Polish border, I don't know. But such a move, at least to push the Ukrainians in a position where they can't use artillery to hit Russian territory, maybe, but that's kind of be a slippery slope, I would say. But pushing in general, when you have the advantage, that makes sense, and that's what the Russian military are going to do. And then they'll try to see what's going to come of it. This is how, recon through power, recon is made in any war. This is classical stuff.
Right. All right, I'm afraid we're out of time, so we're going to have to thank our guests for their contributions, Hanna Shelest, Roger Hilton and Pavel Felgenhauer. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here, for now, it's goodbye.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.